So the first and most important thing that you need to do in any Blender scene is save your file. If you save it from the beginning, then you'll save yourself a lot of hassle and heartache in the future. So after you've saved your file, what we're going to do is we're going to select this cube just by clicking on it. And we want to get rid of it, so hit the delete button and then it's gone. Next, what we're going to do is press Shift and A, and we're going to add in a cylinder. Now this cylinder has 32 sides running around it. We don't need that many sides, so we need to change this in this box here. Now if this box is not showing, it might just be down here. You just click on that little arrow there and it pops it up. Just click on this and change that to 8. And that gives us a lot fewer polygons. And this is just because it's a style choice more than anything else. Okay, so now we have our cylinder and we can go into edit mode to change this. So we press tab and it takes us into edit mode. And you can tell because it says edit mode up here, the different modes that you can go into: object mode, edit mode, and there's a few other modes here which we won't go into in this one. So you can rotate around the object using the middle mouse button. You can just press and hold that in and it'll rotate around. You can also press the number 1 on the numeric keypad and it'll go to the front view, number 3 to go to the side view, number 7 to go to the top view, and the same can be done by holding Control and 1, 3 and 7, and that'll give you the reverse. So bottom and back and opposite side. So what we'll do is we'll start in front view and we'll need to make sure everything's selected. So this has got nothing selected because there's no orange there. But if you press A, it will select everything within this object. Now what I mean by objects is everything with a little dot is its own object, and within an object you can have multiple vertices connected together with edges which create faces. If you press 1, you get the vertex select mode. This gives us little dots to select, and we can just move individual points around. Number 2 gives us edge select, so all these edges, so it's just 2 vertex that are connected together, and again we can move full edges around. And number 3 is the face. I can move full faces around there. So what we're going to do is put it into front view and press A, and this will select everything. And we're going to press the G key, and that's G for grab, and we can move everything that we've selected around. Now if we want to move it just up directly on the Z axis, we can press the Z key and it'll constrain it to that axis. If we wanted to move it on the X, we could do the X, and the Y the same. And what we can also do is if we wanted to move it only on one axis, so we could press grab and then we can press shift and Z. So that's like a negative selection. It'll say only move it on the X and Y axis but not the Z. And if you start to move something and you want to like release it, just right click and it'll snap it back to its original position without completing the operation. So in this case we go into front view and then we press G, Z, and we're going to move this up. Now I like to make things very precise, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to snap to this grid, and the way that we're going to snap to this grid is we need to have snapping turned on. Now there's 2 ways of doing this. First of all, you can click on the snap icon here to turn it blue, and then that will snap to the grid. Or you can press Control while you do it, and it will also snap to the grid. What pressing Control does is it inverts the status of this. So if we have that on, we grab it, you can see it's snapping. Hold Control, it releases that snapping. So generally speaking, I'll not have it on, but then I'll hold Control whenever I need it. And this also works if you constrain it to the Z, so it goes up and down just there. Now there's different snapping modes. The default is increment, which is the grid. The others you'll need throughout various scenarios, but generally speaking, this one will be the one you use the most. The reason we have this in front view mode is in relation to the snapping, because as you can see, if we grab on the Z and we move it up, it snaps to these little grid marks here. Now if we had it in this position here and we grabbed on the Z, we can move it freely like this, but if we press Control, you can see it snaps in greater increments, and that's because it's using the size of this grid here. There is an imaginary grid which cubes are this size going upwards. So if we have it in this view, we can see the smaller divisions of the grid. We can grab this, move it up on the z-axis, and we can go 1, 2, 3, perhaps four squares up. That'll do. When it comes to moving objects, there's two ways that you can move things. So you can grab them in objects mode. Now you can see that small orange dot. That's the origin of the object. This means that you're moving the entire object itself. If you enter edit mode and you grab things, you see how the orange dot doesn't move? So that's moving the contents of the object. And it's important to understand what you're actually moving and why, because what we can do is when it comes to, say, rotating this object, it'll rotate by default around its origin point, which is this dot here. You see how it rotates around that spot? Now there are other ways that you can rotate things, but this is the default. Now if we go into edit mode and we were rotating something, you see how it rotates about around the medium of what we've got selected. And if you're not aware of where your origin point is, it can confuse the issue. Okay, so let's tab back into edit mode. Now what we're going to do is going to make like a little kind of head thing here. And there's two ways to do this, and I'm going to show you both just so that you can see the different ways that you can get to the same result. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to grab this face here and then move back to front view, and we're going to press E to extrude, and that'll move an extrusion from the original cylinder here. As you can see, there's an edge that runs around it, so that's essentially split this geometry into two sections. It's made it bigger and split it into two sections. And now what we can do is we can select this face at the top and we can press S for scale, and we can scale that in any amount that we want. So that gives us a kind of a head shape, a very basic top of the head. Now another way that you can do this is if we just press Ctrl Z to undo all of these things that we just did, we can select this section here and we can press G for grab, and then we can grab this on the Z axis and we can just move it up to this section here, and then we can press Ctrl B for bevel. You see there? And ultimately the end result is the same, but there's two different ways of getting there. Now there's one thing that you can do with most operations, whether it's grab, rotate, scale, and in this particular case the bevel. What we can do is we can type in specific numbers on the numeric keyboard and it will use those to determine the extent of the operation. So if I was to type 0.4 for example, now you see when I'm moving my mouse it's not changing because I've set that to exactly 0.4, and we can see this in this black box that we saw earlier. So I can see there the width is 0.4, and I can adjust this if I want to. I can make it smaller or larger, and there's different types of operations that I can use, but I'm just leaving it as default in this particular case and setting it to 0.4. Ultimately, if you learn the different ways of doing things, then there will be scenarios where one is the right way to do it, rather than in this case where two routes lead to the same destination. Okay, so now let's make a section for the face. So what we can do is we can press Ctrl R, and then when we hover the mouse cursor close to an edge, you'll see a yellow line that will pop up just like this. So that's indicating the cut is going to go horizontally all around this object. So this will go around it in a big circle. Now let me just demonstrate doing it another way. If we held it up close to this edge, it will cut through there. So that's how we determine the direction of the loop cut. So what we're going to do is we're going to put it on the horizontal like this, and we're going to click. And now initially this will let you adjust it to the position that you want it to be. So you can actually, put it high or put it low, or you can just right click and it'll leave it in the default position. Now if you wanted to, you could increase the number of loop cuts in the last operation properties window. So if you felt like actually you needed more, then you could increase it however much you like. But in this particular case, we just need the one. If you wanted to, you could press Ctrl R and use the mouse scroll wheel to increase the number of cuts. That's another way of doing it. That's the more common way of doing it. But if you decide that you're going to commit to that one and you want to change it, then you can still do that in the last operation properties panel. Okay. So the reason we did this is so it could help us define the area that we're going to use as the face. So press 3 to come into face select mode, and we're going to select these two faces here. And now we're going to inset these faces using the I key. So that's I for inset. And all we do is we move the mouse and it'll get smaller and smaller and smaller. And we can determine how much we want. Now, if it looks like this, that's fine. All you need to do is press the I key for a second time. This means individual, and then I again, it combines them together. Now I mentioned about the snapping, pressing Control. This is one tool where it doesn't actually work. If I was to use Control, it actually pushes it in and out, and it's kind of annoying, but that's just the way it is. So I'm going to inset that. I'm going to say that's probably about right for his face. So now what I want to do is I want to extrude this inwards into the mesh to make the face. So if we press E and we can extrude it so it can come out, it'll add geometry this way, or we can push it in and it'll add geometry this way. So if we click it there, what we can say is that this is like a helmet perhaps, and this is the face. And what we can do is we can select these two again, and we can press I to inset them. And what we're going to want to do is press I again for a second time to get those individual faces, and we can just make them sort of this sort of size for eyes, and we want to extrude them again. Now if we extrude, we can see here that they've kind of come off on an angle, and I don't like that. So a different method that we can use is we can press Alt E and extrude along face normals, and then we can just push them out a little bit, and you can see how they're flat to the face in the same direction as this panel here. Now that's because they're extruded along the face normals. What a normal is, it's a way of saying the direction that the face is pointing, and you can visualize this if you come across to this little icon here with the two circles. You just go on this drop down and you can come down to this normal section here, and you can click on this little icon, and these little blue lines show the direction of the normal. So that way you can know what direction something's pointing. Now all normals have an axis, just like the world axis that you have X, Y and Z. A normal has an axis as well, and it's always useful to remember that these little sticks, with them being blue, it's the Z axis. Now that might be confusing because I've told you that Z is up. How can this also be Z as well? So this comes down to the transformation orientation, and we can see this here. So these are your transformation orientations, and this is set to global, which means that Z is up, X and Y are backwards and left and right and forward. We can actually change this to normal orientation. So when we have this set to global, if we were to grab this face, for example, press G to grab, and then Z, it'll go up as you would expect, as I've explained earlier. What we can do is if we change this to normal, if we was to grab this and press Z, it'll go in the direction of the Z axis of the normal. You see? So that's basically what normals are. We don't necessarily need it right now, but it's always worth mentioning just so that in the future, if you come across it, you understand it a little better. So let's change the transformation orientations back to global, and let's come down here, and what we're going to do is we're going to select all these faces. So in face select mode, you could actually just click and then shift click and then shift click, but there's an easy way to do this. If we deselect everything and then we hold Alt, and you see how these two faces join here, if we click near this line, it'll select the whole loop all the way around. And now we're going to do that extrude along face normals again, because let me just show you what happens when we extrude. If we extrude, it goes just in one direction. Blender doesn't know which way the normal is because they're all, on average, they're all going in the same direction, so it just has to pick one. So what we'll do is we'll Alt E, extrude along face normals, and we'll just move this out just a tiny little bit there. So there we go. We have some basic shape coming along here, and what we want to do is we want to add some legs and some hands. So let's do Shift A, and we'll add a cylinder. We'll go to Edit, grab this on the Z axis and just move this up a little bit. And then in object mode, we're going to scale by 0.2, and that'll make it just the right size. Now the reason that I scaled that in object mode is because it's just a handy little way of knowing that I would scale it to this point. You see how it scales around the origin? And that's because it's set here for the pivot point of the median point. You can either have individual origins or median point. It's normally set to median point because it's more commonly used, but either would work in this specific situation. So just to recap on what I did there. So we had a cylinder. Its origin is in the middle here. If I scaled it by 0.2, it would end up here. So what I did was I went into edit mode. I pressed G to grab, Z to move it up. And so I moved the bottom to align with the origin point. Press tab to go into object mode, and then scale 0.2. So it's scaled down to that point there. Now, when you scale things in object mode, it can sometimes cause problems. So unless you need to do it for a very specific reason, always press Ctrl A and then click on scale, and that way it won't cause problems. So what we can do now is I'm going to show you a couple of ways of using the mirror modifier. So first things first, if you click on this spanner icon just here, we can click add modifier and we can click mirror. And this doesn't do anything obviously to begin with. Now if we come into edit mode and we make sure everything's selected with A, and we can press G and then X, if we move this, you can see this is mirroring along the X axis, and it's using this origin point as its mirror plane. And so there we go, we've got some legs made. But what we can do is maybe just come into edit mode and then press Ctrl B and just make some little feet perhaps. There we go. So now we've got two objects in the scene. So we don't really need to leave this separate. What we can do now is, let me just highlight something. So this currently is just one object and it's mirrored. Yeah, so there's only this geometry at this side here. What I want to do is come over to the spanner icon while this is selected, hover my mouse over where it says mirror and press Ctrl A. And what I'll do is it'll apply that modifier, which means it's made all of these modified parameters real. So now we go into edit mode on this one, we can see that there's geometry here and there's also geometry here. Using the mirror modifier is handy if you want to model something on one side and not have to do it again on the second side, and it keeps things identical. But when you don't need it, you can just apply it. So what we're going to do now is create a cube, and in edit mode I'm going to scale it down to 0.2, and this is going to be the hand. And we're going to move this over here, and we're going to apply a mirror modifier again to this. So if we apply the mirror modifier in the same way that these legs didn't show anything obvious, it's happening with the cube. And what we want to do is mirror this across here, and we can click on this eyedropper here under the mirror object section and then click on the cylinder, and then that will use this origin point to mirror it as opposed to this origin point. Now ultimately it's the same result, or near enough the same result, with the exception of the origin point being in a different place, but that's an issue for another day. So let's edit this hand, and we'll press 2 to go into edge select mode, and we're just going to grab this edge here. Now if we go into top view and we press G to grab, we can move this around. We can move it around freely, but what I want to do is I want to slide it across the existing geometry. So I'm going to press G once and then G again, and you can see there it slides it across. I can either go this way or this way, and those are the only two directions that I can go. And this is really useful because it kind of keeps the faces in the same direction as they originally were, whereas if I was to grab it, it kind of changes the direction of the face, or the normal of the face. And what I'd like to do as well is, if I select everything and I just want to press G to grab this, and I just want to move this closer to where the origin point is, so this would be the wrist of the hand, and so by moving this to the origin point there, like a wrist would move, if we rotated this with R, you see it pivots around the wrist point, and that's really handy because we can just rotate it to, say, there for example, move this to here, and there we've got a couple of hands. So we will leave those there for the minute. I'm not going to apply the mirror modifier because we want to do something else with this a little bit later, but we'll come back to that. Right, so we're looking a little bit colourless right now, and we could do to add some colours to this little man here. So what we're going to do is we're going to change over to this material preview button here, and there's a couple of different ways that you can actually add colour to this. So we can either use multiple materials, or we can use one image texture, and I'll show you the differences between the two so you can make your decision as to how you want to do this. So if we come into edit mode and then we click on this material icon down here, if we click on this little icon here, there'll already be a material in there, so we can just select that, and what we can do is we can change this base color to anything we want. So let's call this skin, and we'll make it this kind of color, and we can rename it by typing skin. There we go. But the skin we don't want applying to the whole model, so we need to start adding new materials to different sections. So if we click on this face at the bottom, so press 3 to go into face select mode, and then click on the face at the bottom, we want to select this ring here, this ring here, and this ring here. So there's a couple of ways you can select this. You can press Shift and Alt to select this one, Shift and Alt to do this one, and Shift and Alt to do this one, and that'll select everything that you want. Alternatively, you can click on this, and then you can press Control and the numeric keyboard plus button, and if you press it and press it and press it again, it'll expand that selection. And you can contract it as well by doing the same using the minus button, Control and minus, or Control and plus, and I'll select that. Let's create a new material with this plus button here, and instead of this drop down like we did the first time, because this just shows the existing materials, we're going to say new material, and then we're going to click assign there. And so we can say, well, this is going to be the armor, so I'm going to make this a little bit of a silvery color, and we're going to turn the roughness down just to make it maybe 0.1 and 0.3, so reducing the roughness and the specular, so you can kind of see how it's like sort of shining there. And we can even turn it to metallic and make it like a proper metal color, you see. And if we wanted, we could do this one, so click that and Control plus for this, and we could probably say this one, this one, this one, this one, this and this, and then we can click on the new metal material and click assign, and then perhaps we could grab this section here and this section here with Shift, Alt and click. So this one was Alt and click and Shift, Alt and click. That's to add it to the selection. We can perhaps add a new material, and we'll call that team color. We can assign that, and what we can do is maybe make this like a red color, for example. And finally, let's grab the eyes. Same process, select, Shift select, Control and plus to grab those, and then we'll add a new material. We'll call it eyes. Assign that, change that to black, put the specular all the way up, the roughness all the way down, make them super reflective, and then you've kind of got a dude. Okay, so now we've got these objects here that are not connected. What we can do is let's just make some boots. So we can add a new material in the boots, call out boots, and we will make this just black. And then for the hands, we'll just take the existing skin colour and add that there. Now, what I want to do with the boots is I want to join them to this model here. So we click on this one first, so that it's like a bright orange, and then we shift click on this one. This one changes to a dark orange, and this is a light orange. So this basically means these are both selected. This one is the active object. And now what we're going to do is we're going to press Control J, and it will join the selected to the active. Now if we go on edit mode, we can see everything is within this one object. Okay, now we can edit materials in both edit mode and object mode. It doesn't make any difference. Now I don't like this metal material, so I'm going to turn off the metallic. I'm just going to turn down the grey, make it a lot darker, and I've decided that I don't like this metal up here. I don't want him to have like a hood on. I'm just going to select all these objects, change this to the team colour, maybe change that to the team colour, and I think that looks a little bit better. He's kind of got his body armour on and a hood. And so that's one way you can colour a character, is by adding multiple materials. And the benefit of doing it this way is that you can have different properties to each of the materials. So we've got the shiny metal here, we've got the dull red here, and we've got the shiny eyes here, and the dull skin here. So that's one way of doing it. Another way of doing this is to use these colours here on one texture. So we can take all of these off, delete all those. I'm going to start with a new material. And we're just going to call this character 1. I'm just going to remove this one as well and add the character 1 material. Okay, so now how do we get these colours onto here? So my window looks a little bit different to yours. When you open Blender, you will see this kind of layout. I've set up a custom layout just for my own personal preference. Now if you want to add extra windows, you can just right click on any of the lines, either at the top or the side, and then you can add, say, a vertical split or a horizontal split, and then you can change the window type here. So you can change that to UV editor and another 3D viewport if you wanted to. And the palette that I'm using, it's stored as a file locally on my hard drive. So what you need to do is you just need to click open and just locate the image on your hard drive. So it's really easy to set up the same as me if you want to, but I'd probably suggest sticking to the layout and only add windows as necessary. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by selecting the different areas just like we did before. So we have the eyes selected here, and what we can do is we can come into a UV editor window and we can select a color palette here. Now I can link this in the description if you want to download this particular color palette, but they're pretty simple to make. Just they don't need to be these squares or anything like that. Specifically, you can have any, you can just have blobs if you want to. It's up to you, as long as the colors are on the image. And then what we can do there is we can select everything and we can scale it to 0. So that'll make it infinitely small. And then we can just grab this dot and we can move it over here and pop it on that black. Now it's not updated immediately on here, and that's because we've not told it how to. So if we come across to the shading window here, so we have the principled BSDF shader here, and what we can do is we can shift A to add in a texture, and we're going to add an image texture, and we're going to grab the color and we're going to pop it into the base color here, and then we're going to open up our color image. So now we've got a load of colors everywhere, and I'll explain this shortly, but we can see here the eyes are the color that we want them to be. So if we go back over to our main window, so essentially a UV map is a way of telling Blender where to get the images from. So let's select this face, for example. This face correlates to this shape here, and you can move this around however you want. So if I was to say grab this and move it over here, you can see there that it's covering the yellow, orange, and 2 of the skin patches there. And we can see here we've got the yellow, orange, and the 2 skin patches. And you can grab this, and you can move it around, and the more of the image that it covers, the more detail you get in there. So we can see there we've got the full range of colours on this one section. So what we're doing is when we take these faces, select everything, and then scale it down to 0, we can move these and we can pop it, say, on this dark orange, for example. So you can just pop it in there. And so because these UVs are within this square entirely, it only shows the orange because it doesn't cover any of the other colours. And so we're going to do the same by expanding the selection like we did earlier. Select all with A, scale 0, and move that to the orange. Just pop it there. So we have this nice yellowy orange colour. And then same story with the bottom. So we'll do a couple of control pluses to select that. Select this, scale that down to 0, and we'll move that to maybe that colour there. Same story with the hands. It doesn't matter that they're a different object. We can select all, and then we can scale 0, and we can move this to a skin colour, maybe this one. Oh, and I didn't do the face, did I? So let's select these 2 loops here by pressing Alt and then Shift and Alt. It'll select the loop. You can see it's a loop because there's 4 edges and it's connected here, so you can imagine it. So click, 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 like a race car track, and we can scale 0, and we can move it here just like so. And finally the boots. So that's Alt A. One thing I didn't actually tell you about, I don't think, was if I wanted to select this object here without selecting everything, it's very difficult to box select things. Now I could go around and start selecting all this, blah blah blah, but a quick way is if you just hover over it and press L, and it selects both those objects there, and it doesn't select anything else. That's select linked, or I remember it as select island, like the L in island, because it's its own little island. Okay, so we'll select all these UVs here, scale that to 0, and let's just shift that over to the black section there. So there we go. That's like a super quick way of colouring without making multiple materials, because there's one material there. You just literally grab all the UVs, stick them over the colours. The disadvantage is that all the settings for the most part need to be the same. There are ways around that. I'll go into that in a later video. So there's a few things left that we need to do with this character, such as add in some bones to animate this guy, and we're going to look at cleaning up a few things that are not quite desirable in the mesh. We'll save those for a future video because this video's kind of gone on a little bit, but what I'll do before we finish up the video is I'll show you how to quickly render this. So the first thing that we would do is come across to the edit menu and then preferences. So in your preferences, click on the add-ons button. In the search box, type TRI, and that'll bring up a few options. Find the one that says lighting, try lighting, and then all you need to do is click on this tick box here to enable it, and then close the dialog box. So what we want to do now is we want to add some lights using the plugin that we just enabled. So first of all, select your character and then press Shift A, and then come down to light, and we can see an option 3-point lights, and if we click that, it adds 3 lights to the scene. And what we want to do is we want to open up this last operation properties window, and we can adjust things. So what I would suggest doing to begin with is perhaps go into viewport shading and change the lighting with this drop down so that scene lights and scene world are enabled. Now one thing that I want to highlight is that I'm using the Cycles render engine. You may have it set to Eevee, which is a very fast renderer, but it does sacrifice a lot of quality. So what we can do is we want to increase the base energy, and I normally start at around 200 because that's a good value to work with. And we can see there that it immediately illuminates the character. Now something else that I like to do is press Shift A and add a plane. Now we notice that this plane was added directly at the center of the screen, exactly under this guy's feet. That is not by chance. The reason that that happened is because it's where the 3D cursor is. If we had the 3D cursor over here, for example, if we press Shift A, Mesh and Plane, it'll create it over where the 3D cursor is. If you want to reset the 3D cursor back to the origin, press Shift and C and it'll recenter everything. And then you can go about adding the plane directly in the center. So what we're going to do is we're going to scale this plane up by 10. And you remember what I said about applying the scale? Control A, apply the scale. Now we need to come into edit mode. Number 2 for edge selection. Click on this back edge here and this edge here. And then we're going to press E to extrude. And it's a bit wibbly, so press Z to constrain it to the Z axis. And just bring it up quite high, just like that. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to select this edge, shift select this one, and shift select this one. And we're going to use the bevel tool that we used earlier to make a slope here. And what we can do is we can use the mouse wheel to add a few extra divisions in the bevel. And now if we come back into object mode, we can see a slope, but we can see these edges here just like this. What you can do is you can right click and click shade smooth, and that will get rid of those harsh edges. Now these shadows here are pretty harsh and I'm not a huge fan of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shift select all of these lights, come into the light property here, see the little light bulb, and then in the size option we can adjust it. Instead of just clicking on that, if you hold Alt and then click, then type in 2, it will affect all of the selected objects, because otherwise if I didn't hold Alt it would just do the active object, and the active object is the one that's the lighter orange. So if we click Alt and then 2, it makes the area of the lights bigger and it makes the shadows much softer. So the camera, we can position the camera where we want it, and the way to do that is to press 0 on your number pad to go into the camera view, and this will show you what the render will be. So if I were to render this image now, it would look pretty much like this with just a little bit more quality. Now if I didn't like this angle I could move it around, and I find the best way to move a camera around is by pressing N to bring up your transform properties, and then click on the view menu and then click on the camera to view, and we'll see this red dotted line around the camera. So now what we can do is we can move the camera around just using the middle mouse button. So it's middle mouse button to zoom around, press shift the middle mouse button to move, and so we can position the camera however we wish. If you want to center an object, just click on the object and press the full stop or the period key on your numeric keypad and it will center it to that object. If you want to zoom in a little bit more, press and hold Control while you're clicking the middle mouse button and it will zoom in and out. So once you have the camera in the position that you want, you can just press F12 and it will render that scene. What I'd probably suggest doing before we rendered is come to this render properties tab here. It's the little camera, and if you're on Cycles, this is going to take a while to render. I'll show you the difference between Cycles and Eevee. So this is Eevee, and this is pretty much what you'd get in a render, whereas Cycles, it gives you a little bit more depth to the colours, a little bit more vibrancy. It's just a higher quality. You have softer shadows. It does look a lot nicer, but it can take some time. So what you can look at changing is the settings here. So if we come to sampling and then we look at render, the noise threshold you can adjust to say 0.1 because it's default at 0.01. The samples are something like, I think it's 4096 is the default samples. That's way too high. So we can change this to 0.1 and we can change this to 100. Depends on the scene. We could probably even get away with maybe 50 in this particular scene just because of the simplicity of it and because the surfaces are nice and flat. And when we render this, it will render so much faster and not lose any quality really. So here's the rendered result. Now if you want to save that, all you need to do is come to Image, Save As, and then find a place to save it on your hard drive, and you can share it on your socials or wherever you want. Set it as your desktop. So I think that would be a great place to stop. What we're going to do in the next video is we're going to take this to the next level and build upon what we've already learned. We're going to add some animations, we're going to fix some things that we're not happy with, and maybe build a bigger scene. So if you're interested in seeing that, then hit that like and subscribe button, and I will see you in the next one.